Great. Thanks again, John, and also for all the help you've provided throughout the project, and also thanks to all my supervisors at Fish and Wildlife, which have been really helpful in working on this. So my name is Caitlin McNamara, and I'm going to be talking about coho salmon in Big Beef Creek. Some of these changes include climate, habitat, biological effects, and what that means specifically for the wild stock that's found within the system. Okay, so coho salmon are historically abundant in Washington state. They prefer smaller streams and tributaries, and fry will emerge from gravel. This is an image of a red that is constructed in the freshwater environment. And this is an example of a newly emerged fry. They spend 18 months of their initial life cycle in freshwater, and then the next 18 months in the marine environment where rapid growth occurs. The reproductive migration for coho salmon begins in the fall, and adults that return are typically between 2 and 3 years old. The date is crucial for the success of the species. Females determine the offspring's environment exclusively by spawning site and the date. Basically, arriving to the spawning grounds early ensures better site selection, a more protected area, and less competition with other adults. So a little bit about the site. Big Beef Creek is found on Kitsap Peninsula. It feeds into Hood Canal. On the left, you'll see the waters that flow directly into Hood Canal from the site. And on the right, you'll see a little bit of the house, the juvenile outmigration trap, and the adult weir. This site has been used for long-term ecological studies and specifically has been monitored by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife for over 30 years. This is where I collected most of my data from. It's also important to note here that this is only for wild stock coho, so this system is not influenced by any hatchery fish. So I performed a multivariate analysis of the coho salmon return at Big Beef Creek to better understand the ecological health of this population and elucidate the impacts on the species. Mainly, I examined a combination of effects that occur during the adult life stage, where migration upstream occurs, and this is typically in the months of October to December. Because I looked at several variables, I created this roadmap. I looked at streamflow, harvest, size selection, and migration timing. And I'm going to start with streamflow. So river flows determine the access to spawning grounds for adult fish who are returning to reproduce in their native streams. A common observation in the field is seemingly lower stream flows that extend later into the season. There's also a growing body of evidence that shows that streamflow timing is shifting in other areas, seen in Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, for example. Some examples of streamflow are on the screen. On the left, you'll see an image with very low streamflow. This is probably only a few inches deep and would not allow for fish passage. Now, this picture is in the fall, taken in the fall. And before that, some of these systems, they have very low stream flow in the summer. So they're coming off extremely low flows with some sections drying completely. The other side of this is the right image on the screen, where you actually have extreme flow variability that has come through after eggs have already been laid. So you can see some of these eggs are exposed, little pink or orange dots in the gravel there. So salmon have to wait for precipitation and associated flow in the fall. And it's also a fine balance because on the other side of that, you can have extreme and harmful stream flows. So the stream flow characteristics that I looked at were the variability, seasonal fractional flow, and center of mass flow timing. This is an example of some of the stream flow variability that you see at Big Beef Creek. These are throughout my study period, which I looked at 2000 to 2020, so 20-year period. The red line is the same in all of these graphs, and that's the 20-year average. So you'll see that at points you have flow for the year that is below the 20-year average, and other points where it's exceeding it at various extremes. The next, I looked at seasonal fractional flow, which is basically the amount of flow in a season. So the time that I looked at was the spawning period in the fall from October to December. So that total amount of water by the total amount of water for the given year. I then used a 3-year moving average, which allowed me to enhance my statistical robustness. And I found that there was a declining trend in this data, basically showing that the amount of water seasonally is going down each year. I was curious to see what that looked like or how it compared to prior years, so years before 2000, which is where I started my study. And I did find a declining trend, although not as significant. So telling me that in the last 20 years, the water level's really been going down. Next, I looked at, is there a delay in stream flow timing? So is the stream flow available for Coho happening later in the year? The results here were not significant. So next, I looked at harvest. So the image on the screen is a coated wire tag. It's a very small 1 millimeter metal tag that's placed in the nasal cartilage of the fish. It remains the most important tool for salmonid research, and it's great in studies examining multiple life stages, which is what I did. It also tells you ocean distribution patterns, fishery impacts, and survival rates. So I collected data where this online coated wire tag database is stored and used that for my harvest rates. So the harvest data and coated wire tag led to timing of harvest and a harvest to stream flow relationship. So when I say harvest, I mean specifically the terminal net fishery, which occurs in Hood Canal. Previous reports have shown that the harvest of Big Beef Creek coho have exploitation rates of 60 to 90%. This occurs at the beginning 8 weeks of migration every year. So the graph, the red is harvest, which is the terminal net fishery, and the blue is those that are actually passed upstream and allowed to spawn. Low stream flow equals better harvest opportunities. So that was another question that I was looking to answer. So stream flow plays a part here. You'll see in this graph that the red line indicates the harvest rates and the blue line indicates the flow rates. So as long as the flow is low enough that it prevents the fish from getting in, it also gives them more opportunity to be caught. So low flow equals better harvest rates. For my study, I just looked at the Marine Area 12, which is the area that is in close proximity to Big Beef Creek. And this allowed me to determine that relationship between stream flow and harvest. So next, I looked at size selection. So this is also along the lines of harvest. Because it's a net fishery, there's size selection occurring. This has been well documented in other fisheries and other species, specifically Chinook or sockeye. So we know that it's a common issue in the harvest of salmon. And I was able to show that it's also occurring here on Coho in Big Beef Creek. So you'll see the harvest again is those from the terminal net fishery, and those lengths are greater than those that are passed upstream. What I think is interesting also is there is a general negative trend among both groups. So just in general, we're seeing fewer larger fish. This is problematic because smaller salmon have lower fecundity, lower offspring survival, and they may not be strong enough to dig deep enough redds that reduce the susceptibility to scouring from stream flows. The use of nets has also been pretty controversial. They just cause severe damage, even for fish that are able to escape. They leave lots of scars and lots of scale and slime. So the survival rate, even when fish do escape, is very low. So last, I looked at migration timing. With all of these factors that I've been talking about so far, they all occur at the same time. And previous studies have shown that evolutionary changes can occur in response to continued pressures, specifically those at the same time. So low stream flow harvest, it's all occurring in Big Beef Creek at the beginning of the season. So I wanted to see our coho trying to shift their peak migration, so the most amount of fish that come back at a given time, to avoid these. And that's not the case. They're actually continuously trying to come early. So over the years and the months, the migration strategy is to arrive to spawning grounds early. And lastly, with migration timing, I was looking, I used coded tag data again, and previously established early, middle, and late group out-migrant juveniles, which are identified by their unique tag codes, and compared them to when the adults were returning. Based on the results of my study, I was able to assume that these migration timings are not independent of each other, with the exception of 3 years. So basically, juveniles that out-migrate early are likely to come back early as well. Criteria for assessing and identifying salmonid stocks, as well as managing them, includes understanding the location, timing, and abundance. So all factors of this study. Also, evolutionary changes are becoming increasingly important and valued towards conservation and management of the species. So in my study, I was able to show significant findings that showed a decrease in seasonal fractional flow, a size selection of the harvest, earlier migration timing, and I can suggest that migration timing may correlate to juveniles, from juveniles to adults. And questions?